Today is November 27th, 2023, and this is the 22nd episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade tonight. Joe and I will recap the big game between Michigan and Ohio State, the college football playoff implications for that game and the other games around the country, and then we'll transition to basketball and talk about the Big Ten teams and how they fared in Feast Week. It was definitely a mixed bag with Joe. First, we're going to talk about a couple coaching changes in the Big Ten. And first, we're going to go to Bloomington. Tom Allen has been fired after 7 seasons in charge. The 2020 Big Ten Coach of the Year is out after just 3 wins in the Big Ten in the last 3 seasons. That's the reason why he's on the cover of the thumbnail. Joe, this was easily, you could see this one coming.
Yeah, Sean, we alluded to this all offseason regarding Tom Allen's job status, and this really comes as a shock to no one. If we put someone in a time machine in August and put them to today, no one would be shocked. I think the thing that maybe gets me the most is the idea that he might have stayed because they were playing better toward the end. Again, they weren't doing it against great competition, being Illinois, a banged-up Wisconsin team, and Purdue. But, you know, for what it's worth, they did play better toward the end. So I think that bodes well for Tom Allen's reputation, more so as just a player's coach, which is what he was often labeled as in that breakthrough COVID year they had. I think this is a really interesting position, Sean. I kind of compare it to the North Carolina job that opened and eventually when Mac Brown took it back around 2018, because Indiana is a place where you don't have a lot of pressure. You have pretty realistic expectations, I'd say. Definitely a basketball school, basketball state. No one, including you, especially, is going to argue with me there. I really think you could have a whole myriad of candidates. Maybe you have an ex-coach like a Dan Mullen. I see all the Tuanon or those kind of people floating John Gruden out there, and believe me, I think that'd be great for the Big Ten. I think that kind of personality is what the conference needs, especially should it lose a Jim Harbaugh or someone like that. But really, Sean, I really think this is one of the more intriguing jobs, not the best one, certainly. And I know there's a bunch of jobs like A&M that have been taken, and UCLA is certainly a better job prestige-wise. But, maybe a job that a coach who really wants a low pressure, who just really enjoys coaching without all the BS of NIL and having to go 11-1, 10-2, wants to take. So I think this could be a really interesting coaching search. You're going to see all kinds of names pop up, from coordinators to Midwest guys and to ex-coaches like a Dan Mullen. Football needs it. I think they've gone pretty conservative. Wilson, even though he
Go more into that and the whole new rules for scheduling in an off-season episode. They're going to retain Chip Kelly. So unless they change course, he's going to be a coach in the Big Ten next year. But Allen was seen as this really great hire when it happened, and obviously it hasn't worked out. But as basically every other team that's not Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State has proven, getting into that top 3 in the Big Ten East is almost impossible for more than a season or 2 at a time. The other news, Joe, which was a vacancy that was opened fairly early in the season, was Mel Tucker at Michigan State, and they made a new hire in Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. Tell us about him.
I am really intrigued. I think this is probably the most interesting hire in the Big Ten. Interesting in terms of not even uncertainty, but this is kind of a Rich Rod-esque move. I'm not saying it's going to be as big a disaster as that is. In fact, I really like what Jonathan Smith brings to the table, because what his style of football is what Michigan State's wanted to be. It's what gave them a lot of success in that first 2013 Rose Bowl team they had, the team that beat Ohio State. And Urban Meyer handing him his first ever loss as a Buckeye head coach. He's a guy that really wants to run the ball. He's all about winning in the trenches, and as we're going to talk about later, that's what the 3-time probably defending conference champion. That's what their identity is, and there's a lot of similarities. We could always talk about the coach at the second school in the state, Oregon State, Oregon, Michigan State, Michigan, and he had a lot of success against Oregon last year. And the COVID year too. And, I don't really want to talk too much about Oregon State's performance against Oregon. Maybe one foot was out the door, maybe one wasn't. His name was certainly floated along with Mike Elko's toward the latter half of this coaching search. So I think his biggest obstacle is going to be finding someone to recruit those guys in Ohio that really made Michigan State good in the mid 2010s. He is a West Coast guy. He uh, never lived east of the Rockies. So I think this could be if he integrates it right, he's going to keep certain members on staff. I believe the wide receiver coach Hawkins, perhaps Harlan Barnett. I'm not going to say that with certainty because it's not confirmed, but you know, I think one thing we do have to watch out for, Sean, is Mark D'Antonio is rumored to want to stay on as in some kind of role. I think that's fine in an administrative sense, but he has to be limited. I think a lot of Michigan State fans love Mark, but they still certainly have a sour taste in their mouth from the mess he left them in 2020. And frankly, perhaps that's part of the reason why Michigan State's roster was so depleted the past couple seasons. But really interesting hire for the Spartans. I do think if he gets the coaching right, the recruiting right, and if he hits that portal immediately, it could be interesting. But as of now, Sam Levitt and Caden Hauser, the two quarterbacks, do plan to enter the portal. Can't see how Noah Kim wouldn't follow them. Doesn't mean they're gone, but certainly he interviewed for the job, and now he has to interview for the coaching job to coach these current players on that roster, which still does have talent, Sean. So
Yeah, the manner of this hire, with it being sort of like hours, less than a day after Oregon State's last game, means that, Michigan State had made their decision on him a while ago. Not sure when that was, but the decision was made, and he had probably already accepted the role, at least verbally, weeks, maybe even months ago. And in terms of Jonathan Smith, Oregon State is homeless next year. They're one of the teams in the Pac-12 that kind of got hung out to dry. They are still technically members of the Pac-12 next year, and the rest of the teams are either going to the Big Ten, the ACC, or the Big 12. So, good news for him. He basically built Oregon State from scratch, from what I can tell. Not going to pretend like I knew the whole situation there, but he's improved them to a top 25 team this year in what is certainly the deepest conference in the sport. So, Joe, that's our coaching search. I'm sure, we'll start hearing more news about Smith's staff there at Michigan State, and we'll hear a ton of names linked with Indiana, but that's kind of it for coaching now. We're going to start off the game recap, Joe, with really the only game that needs to be talked about, and that's the big game in Ann Arbor. Michigan holds serve for the third straight year, 30-24. They're going to the Big Ten championship game. They finished the regular season 12-0. Jim Harbaugh will be back on the sideline next week at Lucas Oil Stadium against Iowa. Didn't seem to me that this game, Michigan never really let up control in this one.
yeah, I push back only on a little part of the game, Sean. I think the overwhelming narrative, and you could pick any, you could pick Ohio State's toughness, which I think they were very tough, and I think Ohio State, frankly, played a very good game. It's really those two mistakes, and I'm not going to tell you what Joel Klatt and Josh Payne and all the other analysts do because, you listen to this show for other reasons. I think the biggest takeaway that I can give you is the small portion in the third quarter where Ohio State had control when they went on that long drive where Travion Henderson and Chip Trayanum were drilling 5-6 yard runs at ease, just go plowing through the Michigan D line. When they made it 17-17, the stadium was silent. I promise you, any Michigan fan who said they never had a doubt was lying. There were plenty of doubts in the stadium. And when Zach Zinter went down, really a scary moment for everyone involved. That was probably the height of the doubt. Now, when Blake Corum scored the TD, it definitely instilled life back in the stadium. But I think the turning point of the game for me, Sean, was the next drive when it was 24-17. Ohio State didn't attempt to establish the run again. They went 3 and out. And I think that was probably their biggest mistake. I think if Ohio State, we said all year, Sean, that to beat Ohio State, you need to get a lead on them. It's not because you're going to blow them out or win by 2 scores. It's because eventually they're going to get clicking. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to do something. Kyle McCord, and a lot of people are criticizing him. He is going to find his targets. He gets his playmakers the ball. And, Ryan Day, whatever you want to say about him, he is one of the best play callers in college football. There's no coincidence why he's one of the most sought-after candidates even still in the NFL today, they would love Ryan Day to scheme up an offense, perhaps like the Chargers. I'm not dropping a hint, but a lot of pundits talk about it. But really, Sean, I think after that, Ohio State seized control of the game because uh, their offense dominated on that tying drive at 17. And when Michigan got a two-score lead, Ohio State was pretty much at Michigan's mercy, and they did have a shot at the end. Um, Ultimately, I don't know if that ball would have been picked if McCord wasn't hit. Ultimately, all that matters is what happened. He was hit. Pressure finally got home. They only had one sack on McCord the whole day. And Michigan goes to the Big Ten title game. Ohio State, because we got a lot of questions about it, so I'll answer a bunch now. They need a lot to happen to get into the playoff. And I ultimately do not think that's fair. They are clearly one of the best four teams in the country. I think they can play with anyone, including Georgia, as proven last year. So for them to make it, I'll just be very clear. They need Florida State to lose. They need the Pac-12 winner is in no matter what. But I'd honestly cheer for Washington because Washington undefeated doesn't matter. But Washington losing a close game to Oregon, a team they've already beaten, is that really going to knock them out? We saw with TCU last year; they lost to a three-loss Kansas State team, and that still didn't knock them out. Clearly, a lot different last year, but and the biggest one that's not getting enough attention is Texas versus Oklahoma State. They need Texas to lose because Texas will jump Ohio State, even if they are below them tomorrow with one more top 25 win over Oklahoma State, especially when their loss isn't really that bad to a 10-2 Oklahoma team on the last second at a neutral site. I do ultimately think that's really unfair, and 12-team playoff is coming in for scenarios like this, but Sean, Ohio State, the opportunity was there, and even the most loyal Buckeyes, they had plenty of opportunities when Michigan was quite passive in the second half. They were aggressive on fourth down, but Ohio State did have the ball last with their best unit on the field. Traditionally in the Ryan Day era, they would always want to win it with their offense, and unfortunately for them, they were just one play short, and that ultimately is probably what's going to cost them a playoff berth this year.
Yeah, after it was 0-0, Joe, and Michigan took a 7-0 lead, Ohio State did not have another possession with the game tied or the lead. So Michigan did a good job of really not letting them take the lead. The one time that they tied it in the third quarter, like you said, they followed up with the 3.5-minute touchdown drive right after that. And, McCord had two picks, like you said. I don't think the second one is his fault. He has to throw it to the chains.
Not at all.
You have to get it there. The first one, I do really think that was just a good defensive play. I mean, if the defender is not there and does not jump that slant, then that's could be 25-yard catch. So people who have been criticizing him all year, taking their victory lap here, I don't think that he played a bad game at all. I don't think Ohio State played very bad, and it could be a loss on the road at the number one team tomorrow. So that's your only loss on the year. I think you got to have at least a conversation about Ohio State getting in. But like you said,
absolutely.
Like you said, there's going to be a lot of teams with one loss that are really good. And from what I understand, not unlike basketball, every single game, whether it's the conference tournament or the first game in November, means the same. I don't think that the committee will do that for football. I don't think they should. And, it comes into an Oregon Pac-12 champion. Washington already beat them. So you're going to put Oregon ahead Washington, even though they've split the season series? All these conferences have good teams that will think that they have at least a shot of getting two in. And if things go a certain way, we could have a college football playoff without an SEC team, which is just crazy if you think about it. So I don't think Ohio State will make it, but I think they are in the top four, like you said.
Absolutely. Sean, I will speed through the rest of the Big Ten games in almost under a minute and cut me off if I go too long. Nebraska loses to Iowa. Iowa already clinched the West, so it didn't matter in that sense, but matters because Nebraska, now only 5 of their 13 seasons in the Big Ten, 5 have been winning. That is shocking. That's my one takeaway. And speaking of takeaways, it again cost the Huskers. I do think Matt Rule is the guy there. He's improved them tremendously, but unfortunately we'll be sitting home in December. Penn State, Michigan State again. Is that really worth Penn State pretty much. Their defense shut Michigan State less than 100 yards.
53 total
Nick,
yards to 586.
yeah, that
I'm not sure
says it
I've seen a
all.
game like that.
Yeah, I will say credit to Michigan State fans for filling up Ford Field. Seriously, I don't know if Michigan in that scenario would do the same. Purdue beating Indiana again, two non-bowl eligible teams. Um, Good for Purdue getting that trophy back, which escapes me because who cares about that game unless it's basketball. Northwestern, David Braun, he should be coach of the year. Someone asked that. Uh,
Well,
Definitely should be
well,
coach
they're
of the
not going to
year.
give it to our boss, so they should
No,
give it to him. They should.
they should give it to anyone but him. Michigan at 12-0, even Ohio State went 12-0. That's the expectation at those schools this year. So really good on him. Illinois, tremendous fall from grace, 5-7. Maybe they sneak into a bowl game because of APR, but certainly a disappointing year after the breakthrough year they had last year. Wisconsin again, 7-5. Uh, does beat Minnesota. I do think that's really good. They lost them 2 years ago there, and they just needed a firm hold of that rivalry. And Luke Fickell is 1-0 now in the Axe game. And finally, Maryland beating Rutgers. Uh, Again, two of teams that are in Big Ten East purgatory at this stage. Luckily for them, they'll vary it up next year with the opponents. But I think Rutgers overall can still feel really good. I know they ended the season on a bunch of sour notes, but 6-6. It's the first time they've been bowl eligible for real, not from 2021, since 2014. So tip of the cap to Coach Schiano. And Maryland is pretty much the same. Won a lot of games by a lot against teams they really should do that against. Lost 2 games to teams they shouldn't have lost to, and competed well with Michigan and Ohio State, but sadly for them, um, pretty much all the same. Sean, that pretty much does it for football. Should we get to basketball?
We've got 8 bowl eligible teams in the Big Ten and 3 teams with 5 wins. So at least 8 teams going bowling. Good sign for the conference. I'm not going to tell you that you have to watch Northwestern and whoever they play in the bowl, but for them to make a bowl is really just a tremendous accomplishment for what they had to do before the season. So I think that's all we have for football, Joe. We will go more into Michigan and Iowa later in the week. And that's really it for football. You've got one more team playing for, or 2 more teams playing for a Big Ten championship, and then we'll have a number of bowl games that we'll go into. And, you're already starting to see it with some of the teams that are not bowl eligible, but a ton of people in the transfer portal already. Brendan Swordsby from Indiana, the quarterback, he is in portal. I would assume that he will not be the first, and there'll be hundreds, honestly. We don't have to go through each one of them, but change the nature of college sports now. So, Joe, we're going to switch over to basketball. Pretty busy feast week for the teams in the Big Ten. And I would say the conference, basketball-wise, is definitely in a better spot than we were a week or maybe 2 weeks ago. And that really, most of the credit goes to the team that was just pushed up to number 1 in the AP poll. That's Purdue. They go to Maui. They win 3 games against top 11 teams. Joe, Purdue should be national championship contenders this year.
John, it is. I'm not going to be a Purdue hater here. They played phenomenal in that tournament. All 3 of those teams bring something to the table, whether it's talent, scheme, experience, and Purdue lived up to the test. And I will say that it's very good for the conference, but frankly, Purdue being good has to be the bare minimum at this stage. And what impressed me most about this week, Sean, was the conferences look better in spite of Michigan State, and that's not to say they stink. Michigan State still doesn't have a quad 1 win, which is shocking. Now they have playoff opportunity. They do play Baylor in Detroit at Little Caesars Arena. I think that'll be their first non-conference quad 1 win. But I don't know how anyone thinks anyone besides Purdue is going to win this conference running away. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State still, I don't think they're just shooting it a little worse than we thought, but they were always going to take a couple lumps. They'll be ready come January time, Big Ten regular season, but Purdue is a little better than we thought, I think. They for the most part, do return a lot of their team from last year that was the number one team for most of the season before they got picked off by Fairleigh Dickinson. But, Edie is in only 28 minutes a game. He's got 23 points a game, and he's shooting almost 60%. And he's missed a lot of shots that he should make. So I think that number will go up. Smith and Lawyer look better than they did at the end of last year. And then Lance Jones, the Southern Illinois transfer, seems like he gives them a little bit more than what they had last year. And, Lance Jones is 9.5 points per game, but, he's good enough to take them to another level, I think. And at this point, I think we would be shocked if they do worse than 15-5 in the conference. And assuming that each team is as good as we think they are, 15-5 is going to be plenty to win the conference. But they did it against Gonzaga, a team that, might not be as good as they usually are, but still a team that has a lot of talent. They did it against Tennessee in a foul fest, Joe, and this wasn't the only game that had a lot of whistles, but Tennessee shot 30 free throws, and Purdue shot 48 free throws.
Ew.
Joe, a lot of people were talking about this one. Any thoughts on the rugby match? It happened here I think that was the semifinal of the Maui.
I think we just talked about football, and I don't want to, compare the sports where it's not necessary, but it kind of shows Purdue could win a tough physical war. Purdue I want to say when they had like the Swanigan's of the world, the Haas's, they're a very physical, like in your face, dribble team. I don't think Edie's as like crazy physical as like Haas or Swanigan because frankly, obviously, it doesn't have to be. But maybe that's the Purdue of old. And those Purdue teams did do better in March than the post COVID teams we've seen. The 2018 and 19 Purdue teams were a lot better in March than the current ones we have. So perhaps it's getting back to that old identity. And I think that could be a really good thing. Now, that was just one early season game. But, if that becomes a trend, that's something we should definitely pay attention to, Sean.
Yeah, the main takeaway that I think needs to be said from this game is that if you foul, they're going to call it. Not, they typically contact in the paint is let go, at least in the Big Ten. And then, they get you with the small stuff around the perimeter, like the hand checks or the bumps or something like that. But the reason why there's so many free throws in this game is because if you've projected yourself as a person who fouls, like the refs are going to be ready to call it. It's like, don't foul if you don't want to give the other team free throws. These teams that play super physical defense that foul all the time, like at Tennessee, like a Rutgers. I've said this before. Rutgers is very, very reliant on how quick the whistle is. And they've won a lot of games because refs have let stuff go, and they've not won because, they've had a quick whistle. But Tennessee fans were mad, I think wrongfully so. There are probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 that probably should have been let go. But when you have the reputation of being a fouler, you're going to get calls. You're going to be called for fouls. So that's something to watch early on. This was not the only game where that happened. Houston does it a lot too. They basically foul you on every possession, and the refs have to find the line somewhere. And I'm not a huge fan of knocking somebody over and not getting a call. And Tennessee borderline does that. And in the Big Ten, we've seen over the years how physical the conference is, and we'll see what happens when the refs come in for the Big Ten season. But at least early on, there seems to be a little bit of a change in philosophy. We know the block charge call is different. You have to be set before the feet, before the offensive player jumps. I've seen a couple charges, but I don't think that's as big of a deal as you think. You just don't set them. But they're supposed to be calling more. They're supposed to be calling every foul a foul. And I think that's really all that needs to be said about it. Tennessee fans will whine, but this is a Big Ten podcast, so hopefully we don't have any of those here. But, Joe, they beat Marquette in the finals. Marquette is an elite team, really good point guard in Kolek, and they actually didn't move down a spot after losing a game. You rarely see that. Now, they did beat the previous team that was number 1 in the country a day before Purdue, but the Maui was an awesome tournament. Even the teams like UCLA and Syracuse were pretty impressive, I think. But other than that, Purdue comes off the island with 3 victories, and they are, probably the number 1 overall seed in the bracket as of now. And anything you want to add on Purdue before we get to another team that won their MTE?
No, Sean, he covered it all pretty much. We can comment on them later once they do something wrong, inevitably.
They will lose. They're not going to go 20-0. And of course, if they do, you can clip this and prove me wrong. But they're going to have a game where they don't shoot it well, and Edey gets in foul trouble, and 17-3 or 16-4. That's still elite in the Big Ten. Another team that won their MTE, Joe, which was one that definitely I did not see coming, was Wisconsin. After kind of getting embarrassed by Tennessee, or not embarrassed, but thoroughly beaten by Tennessee and Providence, they come down and they basically pitch a shutout against Virginia, only giving up 41 points. And then they beat SMU in the Fort Myers tip-off. So good bounce back for Wisconsin. At least you got a path to the tournament now.
Yeah, Sean, I don't think anyone, besides maybe Maryland, in terms of teams with expectations, had as disappointing a start as Wisconsin, but they've really pieced it together and just playing typical Wisconsin basketball, maybe not scoring all that well, but certainly defending well. Now, the one thing I'll say about the Virginia game is I don't know if this is just Virginia's early season clunker. Regardless, still a very good win for the resume. And, it doesn't matter what I think because that's going to be a quad 1 win regardless. SMU, I do not know whether they'll be a quad 1, but I don't know too much about the ponies, admittedly. But
probably not. But
no,
still
but I'm just really impressed. And I know maybe I'm biased. I highlight this, but having John Blackwell, I saw him play high school ball last year. I thought he was a really good player in high school. I mean, clearly he's a D1, Division 1, Big Ten basketball player. But the fact he's come on in, averaging 10 points already, comes off the bench, and didn't even have that good a game against Western Illinois. He's still averaging 10 points a game. I think that speaks volumes. That was the biggest criticism I had of Wisconsin last year. Yes, they couldn't score. Yes, they'd go 5 minutes without any kind of offensive momentum or movement. But if they could get some depth on the bench, injuries will happen. They do happen. It's an unfortunate part of the game. Last year, it really cost them. But this year, I don't know if it'll be as costly. Clearly, it would not help them. But, having guys like that, I think I got to tip my cap to Greg Gard as of now. It looks like he fixed that problem. And a lot of people didn't think he did in the preseason. But the last week has certainly proven that perhaps he has. But we won't make that conclusion until later on overall. That's my take.
Yeah, you have to put yourself in a position where you totally don't go off the rails with one injury. And, if Edey goes down, I still think they win 8 games in the Big Ten. Not that that'll happen, but, they lost. While they did lose their best player, he's not like a superstar way better than the rest of the team. And, we saw it with Rutgers and Mag last year. You've got to put yourself in an opportunity to at least have a chance to win a game without one of your players. Now, the only other thing we should talk about from Wisconsin, Joe, is Connor Essegian. He is not really playing at all for them, and there was rumors that was an injury, but I think that's really just PR. What do you think's going on with Essegian here? He's only played over 10 minutes once. He did make 2 threes tonight and had 6 points, but something's going on there for somebody who played, a lot more last year.
John, I have absolutely no idea why this is happening. I'm not a Wisconsin insider. I don't pretend to have any kind of intel in that program. One thing I'll just say, though, is it's one of the strangest things ever, like having this kind of, especially because Greg Gard is a pretty respected coach of the conference. He's been around since 2016, meaning he's one of the longer tenured coaches in this conference. So I don't know. I've never seen a situation like this at Wisconsin, especially under Bo Ryan. And Greg Gard pretty much is Bo Ryan reincarnated. So I don't want to comment further. All I'll say is it does not help this team at all. Having him out there without distractions takes this team not to a new level, but it can it just gives you another scorer, another guy that knows what they're doing, and another system guy, which is a compliment toward Wisconsin basketball.
Yeah, there were rumblings about him entering the transfer portal at the end of last year. It ultimately didn't happen, but he's only averaging 7 minutes a game after averaging over 27 last year. So It's weird to see a player like this kind of start the season in the doghouse. Sometimes that happens over the course of the year and, deep into the year, but not really, doesn't really look like he's getting out of it anytime soon. Now, the minutes haven't come in for Western Illinois yet because that game was today, but he did only shoot the ball a couple times, so I couldn't have been out there for more than 20. Joe, we've got, I think, three more teams that I wanted to talk about in their MTE. We've got your Michigan Wolverines at the Battle for Atlantis. Long Beach State lost before the Battle for Atlantis, and they leave the other island with just one win. They lose to a good Memphis team. They do, kind of take care of Stanford, who, should be down at the bottom of the Pac-12, and then they lose to Texas Tech on Friday. What are your thoughts about the Battle for Atlantis?
Ultimately, not a disaster, I would say, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, those are two losses that are not going to come back to bite them at all.
No,
not that they already don't have one in Long Beach
they do
State.
have
Let's
one,
address
but
that.
Yeah, both those teams should be in the tournament, and Memphis I thought was pretty impressive in their other games too. But,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say this, Joe, and
Mhm.
I could ask you if you agree with it or not. I think all of this obviously wasn't a good week for Michigan, but I think you basically just washed away all the optimism that you had from the first couple games. So now you're back to where you thought you'd be at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, Sean, I hate to agree, but I do agree. It kind of reminds me of last year. It's just missed opportunity after missed opportunity to get a good win. And maybe the Long Beach State loss isn't as apoplectic as the Central Michigan one was. I hope that's just a quad 3 loss.
Yeah, definitely not.
But one thing I will say is, let's look at this upcoming schedule. We got at Oregon, home to Indiana, at Iowa. They have to win one of those games. There's absolutely no question. They're 4-3 right now. They cannot go to 4-6 because even though they would only have one bad loss with one quad one win, 4-6 is 4-6 in college basketball. So I think that game, Indiana opening night for Michigan in the conference, 9 p.m. on Peacock, and I hate promoting that on this show, but that's probably the game of their season in December. Having a must-win game in early December is not ideal, but maybe they do beat Oregon. I don't think Oregon is unstoppable, but I would certainly be surprised if Michigan took care of it. But ultimately, in 2 words, just missed opportunity for Michigan, which is a shame.
Yeah, it's so not just us, but really all of the people who've previewed the season for Michigan have completely got it wrong. They can score, fine. It's just they have not guarded very well. And even, in the St. John's game, St. John's missed a ton of shots and, couldn't guard a single Michigan screen. But their defense is definitely not as good as people thought it would be. You have good defensive players. You bring them in. I did not go back into Martelli's St. Joe's teams to see if they were good at defense, but it's just very odd to see a team really this completely off. You don't have a ton of great individual offensive players. Now you have players who are complementing a system. Doug McDaniels looked really good. And you have it, the offense is working just fine, but defensively, something needs to change for the Wolverines. Could you narrow it down a little more? What exactly is going wrong on the defensive end?
I don't know if it's a lack of communication or if it's just guys, just typical chemistry, which is the typical Michigan fan excuse. But ultimately, if you think of modern basketball, leaving wide open threes and wide open layups is a good idea, you're in more trouble than one can even imagine. So I don't know, Sean. This is a pressing moment. I'm just glad Michigan beat Ohio State because otherwise this fan base would be playoff lists with this uncertain basketball team. They're not left for dead yet. I'm sure you agree with that. But I'll put this out there right now, Michigan basketball. If you want to keep any semblance of fan support, at Oregon, home against Indiana, at Iowa, win one of those games. It's not even just win one. You have to win one of those games. You win 2, I think you get a whole lot of people back on the wagon. But, Sean, this is making me depressed. I'm having a great week. So let's get on to another team.
As an Indiana fan, I'm not too thrilled about the Big Ten starting here either. It's been really probably over a decade now where this has happened. You know, you get the two Big Ten games before you go back to the non-conference, and Indiana plays Maryland at home. Probably the easiest game as of now that you'll get in the Big Ten. The worst team at home, so it's coming whether the teams are ready or not. Penn State did come in last in the ESPN Events Invitational. Not ideal for them. Ace Baldwin was awesome, but they did lose to his former team, VCU, Texas A&M, and Butler, I think. That was a good tournament for the other teams. If you didn't catch that, FAU looks really good. But last team, Joe, Iowa played in the Rady Children's Invitational in San Diego. They they lose to Oklahoma, who ended up winning the whole thing, and then they beat Seton Hall in the third place game. Don't think we learned a ton about Iowa in this game. So they can score it really well, and their defense is, I wouldn't say inconsistent because it's, that would imply that it's good some of the time. They give up open shots, but they made enough of them against Seton Hall, and Seton Hall had a tough day at the office, so you get out of there with a W.
Don, I think it's really funny that Michigan and Iowa are playing in the conference football title game because those are two of the best defenses you'll see in college football. And then a week later at Carver Hawkeye Arena, you got two of the worst defenses in college basketball play against each other. So, no, that's just a little tidbit for our fans that maybe appreciate that humor. But no, Sean, I really didn't learn a lot about Iowa. I don't even know if the Seton Hall win's going to benefit them that much. I think that could be a quad two. I doubt that's a quad one. I think Seton Hall's a borderline tourney team, maybe, but would they be a 1-50 on a neutral?
Yeah, no, they would not be a quad one unless they win a lot of games here. They they didn't look great in this tournament either, and
yeah,
if anybody's even watched the Big East, it's it might be, it's sort of a Big Ten East situation where you got a bunch of really good teams at the top, and then a bunch of pretty poor teams at the bottom, and it's just going to be hard to get into that top. But Iowa, Seton Hall's not going to get to 50. You do get out of there with one win. Oklahoma looked really good, so that would have been a good chance for a win. But I don't think the numbers really changed a whole lot. And I guess you just move on for Iowa. Michigan is 54th in KenPom right now, 25th in offense, and 111 in defense. And then Iowa is 39th, 15th in offense, and 106 in defense. So just a little bit better at both than Michigan. But obviously, every time a KenPom statistic is read out, they always say, the model really shouldn't be trusted until about 12 games in. So we're about halfway there.
And Sean, one more team I'll highlight is, we criticized their football team, but the Ohio State Buckeyes, man, heck of a week, heck of a game against Alabama. And Jamison Battle didn't even have to play well. 2 of 7 for the field. Roddy Gale Jr. and Bruce Thornton. We rode them a lot last season toward the end. We really liked what we saw when they were younger freshmen. And it's bearing fruits now. Now, their defense, and maybe it's because they played a NATO's team, was not ideal. But if your two top players are dropping 29, 23, and Jamison Battle's only scoring in single digits, that could bode well for your Big Ten performance. Certainly, I think making the tourney is still their goal. I don't think you have to move the goalposts at all, but it shows that even if their defense is bad, that maybe Holman's just decided, F it, our offense this could be so good, and if it's on, we could beat anyone, and I truly believe that. I really think they could beat anyone in this conference if they get performances, not even 29, 23, but if two of those three guys are on, that's a really frustrating thing to play against. And, really good on him. I think people kind of wrote them off after the Texas A&M game. Not that it was a huge disappointment, but, that was the first flash of greatness we've seen from the Buckeye basketball team. So really interested to see how they do in the future here. But, Sean, one last question for you. Of the Big Ten teams, let's go through them real quick. How many have a quad one win right now, or projected quad one win?
All right, I can find this out. It just might take some time.
Yeah, because I could go off the top of my head. Let's
so
go.
Purdue definitely has one.
Purdue definitely has like multiple, so 2 or 3, 4 maybe.
Michigan State should not have one
Michigan
yet.
State doesn't have one.
They're
Ohio State has one against Alabama.
Yep.
Wisconsin definitely has one against Virginia. Michigan has one just because they were at St. John's.
Nebraska at 7-0. I doubt it, but we can check.
Nope.
They did have an MT and a neutral.
Hmm.
I know Duquesne is a quad too.
Yeah.
Indiana does not. I know that. Louisville's a quad two as of now. We've got Illinois, who might have one.
I think they
do
missed a chance
not.
against Marquette.
Yeah, so
they missed the chance.
The
Against
rest
Marquette.
of their games are quad four, so not great for their analytics. But those will change over the course of the year. Now, it does not matter when you played them; it just matters where they stand at the end of the year. So if Alabama completely falls off the rails, it doesn't matter how good they were when you played them. But they made Alabama look uncomfortable, and people are starting to say, okay, maybe Alabama's not that good. Well, maybe Ohio State is, and they looked good against Santa Clara in the championship game. They seem to have figured out their forwards, I think. That was my takeaway from this tournament. They're basically swapping Key and Akpara at the 5, and they're not playing them at the same time. And then Jamison Battle's playing more of the 4 rather than the 3, which is what they've tried in parts of the game against Texas A&M, and he's just not a 3 offensively or defensively, really. So, they've got Central Michigan before Minnesota, Miami, Ohio, and Penn State. There's a real good shot that they go 2-0 to start the Big Ten. And then you've got UCLA, a team that's a little better than people thought. So, so far so good for Ohio State. I think the Texas A&M game would have been really nice, but that's a real good team. So there is no shame in losing to that one. Joe, is that all the teams that played in MTEs? I think it is.
Yeah, and while you're calculating that up, I could, if you don't calculate them, it's all good. But I'm assuming only 6 of our 14 Big Ten teams have a quad 1 win, Sean.
Yeah, I didn't check Nebraska, but I don't think they do.
No.
And then Minnesota
Does not.
Does not either. They did lose to Missouri and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Missouri game at home would have been a good chance for a win. And then San Francisco was on the road. I'm not sure how they didn't go out there for anything else. I'm not sure how they got Minnesota to come out there. San Francisco had a real nice season 2 years ago, and then they lost their coach to Florida. But, it is what it is. The next game for a lot of these Big Ten teams is a conference game. There isn't much this week in terms of, good non-conference games. We've got Rutgers. They just beat St. Peter's. Northwestern was losing to Northern Illinois at halftime. They're now up by 11 real early in the second half. We had Wisconsin beating Western Illinois, like you said. A couple bye games tomorrow. Some more bye games Wednesday and Thursday. And then Friday, we've got 2 games in the Big Ten. So hopefully we'll be on before then, Joe, and we'll preview those games closer, potential matchups, and then we'll also preview Iowa and Michigan. So I think that's all we have for them today. We went a little over today, so we'll save questions for next time. Most likely Thursday. Send out on the Instagram story when we're scheduling that. So, Joe, if that's all I have for him today, anything you want to add?
No, thank you all for listening, and I know we went a little over, but this is really the most glorious time of the year in terms of news. Maybe not if your team's not doing well in either sport or one of them, but coaching searches, transfer portal, and then conference basketball Friday, December 1st. Doesn't get much better than that in terms of excitement. Your heart rate should be up, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the MTEs are done, but we've got a ton of good non-conference games left before Christmas, which will be great. So thank you for tuning into this episode of In a Nutshell. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to check out my Sporkle video if you haven't already. I try and guess all 363 teams in Division One.
It's entertaining. Check it out.
Yeah, if it's getting a lot of views, so we might make Joe and Chuck and Mike give it a crack here in a little bit. It's not as hard as you think. But thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.